Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Lawcast. This week, we're talking about the Great American Bash, 1989. Cewsh, I don't know about you, but I do like my wrestling a little bit. Southern fried, get some chicken, some collard greens, a little bit of barbecue on the side, and I thought this was a perfect show to kick off the summer.
If you want to pair a wrestling show with biscuits, this is the wrestling show to pair it with.
Yeah. When Eric Bischoff took over WCW, pretty much his first move was to try to make them less Southern. And on the one hand, I could understand why he wanted to do this, but I do love some good old-fashioned Southern wrestling.
Now, it must be said, Southern wrestling and even NWA wrestling during this era, it's not my cup of tea. Like, when Law suggested that we should do this show, I was like, all right, I guess we'll do NWA. It's fine.
I mean, I watched that TNA show for you.
Exactly, yeah. I owed you quite a bit.
We get the occasional host's choice episode.
Yeah, I still do owe you because this show was actually good, but we'll get into that one.
This is probably the best show of the era and one of the best WCW shows of all time.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, Southern wrestling really isn't my thing. I've always been a Yankee WWE loving bastard. That's just how I started in wrestling. I didn't even know WWE existed forever, or WCW existed forever, as I've mentioned before. But man, this show was so much fun and awesome.
Yeah, no, this is a great mix of like weird period pieces and then just some straight up great wrestling matches.
All set in a tiny, dingy looking shithole.
Baltimore Arena, baby. This is where they held pretty much all of the Great American Bashes, as I remember. It was really always in Baltimore, and Baltimore doesn't really have a nice basketball arena because they haven't had a basketball team since like the 1970s.
Which is funny because the opening video package is literally all about how beautiful Baltimore is. What a wonderful city this is. Fast forward to now.
Baltimore is a pretty nice place now. Back then it was not.
Bad to say.
Yeah.
Even now, it's
before
like
the harbor, before Camden Yards. It was a rough time for that city.
Baltimore is the fucking Thunderdome now. It's not a great place to be now either.
Fair. So this comes right at the transition from Jim Crockett Promotions to WCW. The Crockett family had been promoting wrestling in the Carolinas since the 1930s. Going into the 1980s, they were one of the strongest territories, which has always been interesting to me because it's not like they had hugely populous areas they were promoting. They were promoting North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, into Maryland. No huge cities there. This is before Charlotte was a really big major city, before the population boom in North Carolina, Northern Virginia. But they just had really strong diehard fans in Greensboro and Winston-Salem, Greenville, all throughout the Carolinas. So as all the other big territories fell, World Class fell apart with the Von Erich deaths, the AWA fell apart after they lost Hulk Hogan, Jim Crockett Promotions emerged as the primary competitor to the WWF. They actually got onto not true pay-per-view first, but at least like the closed circuit super card was more or less their invention with Starrcade. They had a really passionate fan base throughout the South. They had great distribution because they were on TBS, which was national TV that not even the WWF had at that point. And, they were doing real good. They were running not quite neck and neck with the WWF, but hanging in there, doing really strong business. And then they kind of got greedy. They tried to expand nationally too fast. They started running shows in Chicago and New York and outside the South. And I feel like that was kind of a double whammy where they both alienated, their traditional Southern fan base and also didn't really draw in the North. So the big kind of turning point, I feel like, was Starrcade 87, where they got hardballed by the WWF. The WWF scheduled Survivor Series for Thanksgiving the same day, and then also told pay-per-view providers that they had to pick between airing Starrcade and airing Survivor Series, and anybody who picked Starrcade wasn't going to get WrestleMania 4. So Basically, none of the cable systems carried Starrcade. The show totally flopped in Chicago. The fact that the main event was Ric Flair versus Ron Garvin probably didn't help either.
Oh my God.
Yeah, probably one of the worst Supercard main event matchups of all time. But that show was a total disaster. And you know, when you hear about this era in Crockett, there's a lot of references to the plane. They bought a private plane and they were flying all around the country in it. They were staying in the nicest hotels. They were living it up. They bought an expensive office building in Dallas for really no reason other than Dusty Rhodes liked Dallas and wanted to be able to live and work there. They were just spending way too much money, and when their business started to turn south, they basically went bankrupt at the end of 1988. So they were facing liquidation when Ted Turner, out of probably a combination of loyalty to the wrestling business, which had helped him build TBS into a media empire, and a personal grudge against Vince McMahon over the way that Black Saturday had turned out, decided to swoop in and be the angel that saved pro wrestling in the South. He bought WCW at the end of 1988, and after that there were some major changes. Dusty Rhodes, who had been the top babyface for years and also the booker of the promotion, was fired after a couple of incidents. He first tried to book Rick Steiner to win the NWA Championship from Ric Flair in a 5-minute match at Starrcade. I should also point out that at this point, Rick Steiner's gimmick was basically Eugene. Like, he was portrayed as, like, developmentally handicapped. He was over, but still, like, they wanted him to squash Ric Flair. That was a pretty insane decision.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with that. And it's what I always wondered why Dusty wanted that. Like, that's one of those things in wrestling history that you always hear about. Like, hey, Rick Steiner has to go over Flair in 5 minutes at Starrcade. I don't think I've ever heard from Dusty why he wanted that.
No, I've heard it was just him and Flair had a big beef at the time. Like, two big egos and just not getting along.
And if that is what it is, then yeah, you need to be removed as booker if you're.
I think it's also just that. You only have so many years as the top booker, and you kind of see this with a lot of people. A lot of people have had a good run of a couple years. Very few people have really successfully booked for more than a couple years at a time. It always feels like you got a couple years in you, and then you just burn out. You run out of ideas, and things go south.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at everybody who's ever competed with Vince McMahon, nobody's done it for more than like 3 years. Even Vince has never had like the same complete writing staff for more than like a 3-year period at a go. Like, he's not the booker. The people who write for him don't last that long, whether it's except for Pat. Pat Patterson is the only top booker ever to last a particularly long period of time.
Yeah, I think it's just an impossible job to be writing TV every single week. No breaks, no time to recharge.
Exactly. And yeah, it's a monstrous thing to try to undertake, and it drives people fucking insane. See Eric Bischoff and Dusty Rhodes.
So the other big incident was after Turner wanted to kind of clean up the programming, so he said no more blood on TV. Dusty, in reaction to this, booked an angle where the Road Warriors turned heel on him and jabbed a spike into his eye. And that was what got him fired.
Dusty Rhodes may be the most passive-aggressive man ever to have this much power.
He's so angry at you, he's going to have some big giant dudes jab a spike into his eye to spite you. Wrestling is a weird
Not that it was a great idea to ban blood in Southern wrestling anyway, because it was such an integral part of the product.
Oh, yeah. That was every Dusty storyline, was he would get the shit beaten out of him, bleed everywhere, and then come back and get his heat back, have an incredibly bloody match. Yeah, Southern wrestling. And we see on this show, particularly in the War Games match, the lack of blood in that match, I felt really hurt it. There's just no point to a War Games match if guys aren't going to bleed.
Absolutely.
So infamously, Jim Hurd was put in charge of the company. I think everybody's heard kind of the stories about Jim Hurd, but he was a former Pizza Hut executive. He had some background in TV and a very little bit of experience with wrestling, but not at all a wrestling guy that they had in charge of their product. And I feel like here he maybe wasn't exercising as much influence, but as the years would go on, you would start to see more of his ideas making it on TV, and a lot of them were really, really terrible. I mean, everybody's heard about him proposing that Flair become Spartacus and get an earring and shave his head, and the ding-dongs and the hunchbacks, and a lot of the worst ideas in wrestling history.
I mean, he can't even be blamed for that, though, because I don't know what kind of ideas he was supposed to have, but that's what happens when you bring in executives from outside, or even just people who don't know the wrestling industry at all. The wrestling industry is a very, very unique deal, and it took WCW years and years and years to learn that lesson. Honestly, I'm not sure they did. They just lucked out with Bischoff that he actually did know something about wrestling.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, after Jim Hurd, they did try a bunch of, they tried Bill Watts and it didn't work, and they tried, this whole era of WCW is just kind of like, it's like a football team that keeps firing their coach after 2 years. It's just, nobody ever has enough time to really implement their vision. But also, I don't think Bill Watts by 1991 or whenever he was hired was, really the guy to run a national wrestling promotion anyway.
Well, it's actually funny because it's that question, like, how do you go up against Vince McMahon? Like, if you're going to run a national wrestling company, what kind of person can compete with him? Because only two people ever actually really have. That's WCW, like when it was NWA, like right before this period that we're about to talk about, and Eric Bischoff, right? But how do you find that guy? Because basically what you're looking for is Vince, and there's nobody like that.
No, I mean, with Bischoff, they lucked into it. There wasn't really any reason to think that he was going to do a good job. He was, the C-team announcer who kind of inexplicably got put in charge of the company. It's like if they put Josh Matthews in charge of WWE in 2008.
Oh my God, do it. I want to see it.
So Hurd was kind of running the business side of things. They brought in George Scott as the booker. He had, had a really great run in the WWF in the 1980s, booked the first WrestleMania, booked the first couple WrestleManias, but could not recapture the magic with his run here. He lasted less than 6 months, got fired before this show. They did the great Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, 2 out of 3 falls at the Clash of the Champions. Have you ever seen that match?
Oh, yeah. That's absolutely amazing.
The empty arena, literal dark match. They're wrestling in the Superdome with 5,000 people in attendance.
Like a TNA show. Yeah.
Yeah. The story is just that they didn't really promote that match was happening on TV because they were afraid it would kill their house show business if people knew they could see the match on TV, which is a fine argument for not doing the match on TV. But if you're going to do it, you got to promote it, and you should not book the Superdome. Like, don't book dome shows if you can't fill them. Even when World Class would run Texas Stadium and they would get like 25,000 people there, which is a great crowd, it would still kind of look terrible because the stadium would only be half full. I've never been a big fan of stadium shows if you're not going to sell them out.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that. Like, I understand the allure of the stadium show is like, man, look at us, we're big time, we can do it. It only looks good if you fill it. Like, it's not like inherently an awesome thing to do.
Now, 5,000 people in a 5,000-seat building looks better than 20,000 people in a 50,000-seat stadium.
Well, that's why, like, honestly, at the time, a lot of people thought ECW looked like a bigger deal than WCW because WCW was packing a bunch of tourists who don't give a shit into, like, the now Impact Zone. And ECW's got 400 people, but they look way into it, and they're charged up, and they love it.
And they filled every seat in the bingo hall they were in.
Exactly.
So that Clash of the Champions got George Scott fired. He was replaced by a booking committee, which included Kevin Sullivan, Ric Flair, Jim Cornette, Eddie Gilbert, and Jim Ross. That is quite the collection of wrestling minds, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. All of those guys drew money, a lot of money, at some point working in creative. Jim Ross had a big hand in creative throughout the 90s and even a little bit into the Attitude Era before they decided they didn't like his ideas. But, like, literally all of these guys know their shit.
Yeah. And, the things picked up in the second half of 1989, both creatively and business-wise. So this was This may have been, I think that the booking, they were in place for the previous pay-per-view, the Wrestle War in May. So, but basically, we have a company here with a lot of talent. They've got Ric Flair, Sting, Ricky Steamboat, Lex Luger, the Freebirds, the Midnight Express, the Road Warriors, the Great Muta, but just kind of a lack of creative direction. But they're, beginning to right the ship creatively at this point.
Yeah, and the big thing is they know they have a new big top star. Like, Sting is there. They recognize it. Their whole job is don't fuck up Sting. So we can debate whether or not they did fuck up Sting in the long run by doing all of this stuff, but at least they know they have that.
What I've never understood is why they waited so long to put the belt on Sting. It always felt like to me that after him and Flair went to the draw at the Clash of the Champions, Starrcade 88 should have been Sting getting the belt.
It's actually kind of funny because
because he also doesn't get the belt this year.
Right. I really have always thought that, like, they've missed the boat on Sting basically his entire career. Like, in one way or another, like, he never got the belt early enough, and when he did, he never had like a great run with the belt. He did have that run when there was like the talent drain, and he had nobody to work with until finally, what was it, Vader showed up?
Vader showed up and killed him basically. But yeah,
before that, he was wrestling like
have a great feud.
Yeah, but before that, he was wrestling like mid-carders in the main event. Like, Mick Foley got a shot at him, and he always talks about it.
Mick Foley's great, but yeah, at the time he was not even remotely established as that level of competitor.
Exactly. So they do wind up kind of ruining Sting, and then in the Attitude Era, they kind of ruin him again. So that's a whole other thing. But here, like, it's clear that they have him. So how bad can you mess up a company if you have like the next big star?
Pretty bad, it turns out.
Pretty bad.
Yeah. So the big feud of early 1989 had been Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat. I think everybody's heard about these matches. They're amazing. I think they're some of the best pro wrestling matches I've ever seen. Steamboat took the belt off Flair in Chicago at Chi-Town Rumble in February. He successfully defended the belt against Flair in the epic, nearly hour-long 2 out of 3 falls match at Clash of the Champions. And then Flair won back the belt at Wrestle War in May in Nashville. And Flair, in the aftermath of that match, turned face, kind of put Steamboat over as his greatest competitor, shook hands with him. And then Terry Funk, who had been at ringside as one of the judges for the match, got in the ring, kind of hogged the spotlight, challenged Flair to a match. Flair pointed out that Funk had been making movies, not wrestling, and he wasn't. He hadn't earned a title shot. At which point, Funk flipped out, beat Flair up, and pile drove him on a table by ringside. And I liked the way they treated the pile driver there with the right level of respect. As that was something that could end Ric Flair's career instead of something they were going to do 5 times and kick out of in the match.
Yeah, the entirety of like that, their match and the lead up to it is something that I wish wrestling had more of now. Like it's so clearly thought out. Everything is very clearly, this is about the pile driver and about Flair trying to get revenge. And Funk is just a nasty, mean-hearted motherfucker. And it's amazing. Like, it's amazing the amount of psychology that they put, not just into the match itself, but into like every interaction that they had beforehand. It was beautiful.
I love the recurring Terry Funk appearances we're getting on this podcast. This is 1989, where he's been like semi-retired for several years, and people thought he was washed up. And last week we reviewed a show from almost 20 years after this, where he wrestled.
Yeah, literally, like, you could just put that before everything we talked about Terry Funk. He had been semi-retired for years, and here he is back in the ring for some reason.
But he could still go at this point.
Yeah, thank God. This is amazing, Terry Funk. We've seen old-ass Terry Funk, and this is much, much better than that. Yeah,
so getting into the show, it was July 23rd, 1989, from the Baltimore Arena in Baltimore, Maryland. Good crowd of over 14,000. Okay buy rate of 1.5, which equaled about 140,000 buys. down from the previous year's Great American Bash, but I think that's understandable. Great American Bash 88 was the first one on pay-per-view, and they were in kind of a rebuilding phase by this point, so I don't think that was a bad result for the show.
No, I think that was... It seems like there's definitely a decline going on, but this isn't that big of a decline. And it's clear that the place is pretty much packed, though they have the lights down so much that you can't really see it, which I always wondered whether that was just a traditional wrestling thing or just, hey, we don't have to paper the house if we turn the lights off kind of thing.
I think it worked both ways, although I'd rather give away tickets. I'd rather have even if people aren't paying for them, I'd rather have people there and maybe they'll buy some merchandise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always wonder why people all through wrestling history, anytime you give away tickets in order to fill the house, people make fun of the companies who do that. Do that. It's okay. It's so much better for your product to make it seem like people give a shit.
Yeah, I mean, WWE papers WrestleManias more years than not.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, and I wish I was one of those people in the local market who got free tickets.
Yeah, that would be nice. So did you notice the note that kind of popped up throughout the show on the screen that it was, the phrase was presented in its most complete form due to technical limitations?
Yeah, and there were times, especially in the early matches, where it would kind of skip randomly from point to point, or the announcing would be going one way and then it would just randomly be talking about something else. It was clear that whatever video they had was not a complete one, or it had some sort of issues.
So the
digitized
home video releases in this era were always clipped. The version on the network is not clipped. The matches are all in full. But yeah, there's some times where there's interference on the audio, or the only thing that I think was missing was they cut out a Terry Funk promo early in the show. That was the only thing when I looked back at my old notes from the previous time I had watched this show, which was before the network and on Daily Motion. It must have been a rip of maybe, I don't know what it would have been, the original VHS release, because I think that version I watched had the original music on it too. But yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, it's probably a fan tape, which I would bet that it was actually a fan tape, just like this was probably actually a really good quality fan tape that WWE got a hold of in order to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, so that was the first time I had seen anything like that on the network. But yeah, I can just imagine they probably didn't preserve the original version, and the home, like I said, the home video was clipped.
They probably thought it wasn't even necessary to do that. Even Jim Ross at some point in the show just says, I can hear all the VCRs recording right now. I wonder if they thought that the home video wasn't even necessary because everyone was just going to record it themselves.
Yeah, I can imagine that being one of those things they just didn't figure out. If nobody, even before, home video was a thing before DVDs, but I feel like it took until 2003, 2004 for WWE to be oh, we can make a lot of money selling DVDs. The first big one I remember was the Flair DVD.
Yeah. I mean, they had made... I remember having VHSs of Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle
those were terrible.
They were horrible.
Yeah, it's a really bad 30-minute documentary and then 2 matches. Yeah, it was a format that needed DVD where you could just watch a particular match if you wanted to.
Oh my God. When DVDs finally got into FYE and Tower Records and stuff like that, I bought hundreds of them. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, when they had acquired all the video libraries, so it's we're going to have all the great Ric Flair matches in one place and you can own it for $20. That was amazing.
And it was so funny because WWE got into that game so late that literally you go into those stores and Ring of Honor would be right next to WWE DVDs because DVD hadn't really carved out the market yet, which is one of the few things that they were so late to market on.
So the opening match, the $50,000 2-ring King of the Hill Battle Royal. Off the top of your head, can you explain the rules of this match?
I'm going to try, man. All right. All right, here's how I understood the rules of this fucking match. All right, so you got all of these guys in the ring. They all won battle royals at various house shows coming into this.
That's such a WCW thing, too. That's the Dusty Bunkhouse Stampede.
Yeah,
but they don't for a boot.
Yeah, but they don't tell you in advance who any of these people are. They all just come down to the ring carrying crowns. And they get into the ring, And the idea is that they have to throw everybody into the other ring because there's 2 rings side by side. I don't know if you mentioned that yet.
It's War Games. Yeah. You've got a War Games match later tonight.
So there are 2 complete rings with ropes and 4 corners and all of that. You got to chuck them all into the second ring that's over next to the side of you. And then whoever's left in the first ring just kind of stands there and waits around because he's going to face whoever throws all of the other people out of the ring onto the floor in the other ring in a match. So basically, this is so fucking stupid. And okay, so the guy just fucking stands there and waits. Everybody goes into the other ring, throws each other out of the ring onto the floor. Then those 2 people will have a match where it's just a normal match, pinfall, submission, etc. Winner gets $50,000. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't catch that they were going to have a regular match at the end. I don't know if that was the case or not. But anyway,
well, Jim Ross was just like, pins don't count till the end. So that's what I was.
Okay, that makes sense then. No, it doesn't make sense, but I understand.
This is a fucking mess.
So participants in this match: Sid Vicious, Dan Spivey, Eddie Gilbert, Terry Gordy, Scott Hall in 1989, Bill Irwin, Ron Simmons, Ranger Ross, Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, Steve Williams, and Kevin Sullivan. I mean, there was nothing notable about the action here. It was just a battle royal with really dumb and complicated rules.
It was so funny, too, because all of these guys have matches later. So this is one of those weird battle royals where, like, everyone's in a heated battle royal where they're going for the money. And then later they just come out like the battle royal never even happened. Like, oh, hey, time for my match.
Yeah. I mean, kind of a fun, weird gimmick to open the show. I think a battle royal is always kind of a good choice to open a show, just to give it some spectacle, let everybody see a bunch of people at once. Nothing really notable here. It came down to Vicious and Spivey, who were tag partners, the Skyscrapers, as it looked like they were going to fight Teddy Long, their manager, who looked awesome here with his skullet and his aviators.
Oh, amazing.
Got on the mic, said, no, they're not going to fight each other tonight, and they'll split the money. A ton of heat on that. I'd say almost an uncomfortable level of heat for Teddy Long here. Felt a lot like a black man in the South, not being a popular guy at the time.
Oh my God. Like, there were literally guys in the front row who were just like flipping him. They kept showing in the camera every time Teddy Long would talk. They were just like flicking him off, and they were screaming at him, literally standing up screaming at him, even when he wasn't talking, even when he wasn't related to the action. It was like,
yeah, so not much to that one. Second match, we've got Bill Irwin against Brian Pillman. Brian Pillman, before his injuries, was just amazing to watch in the ring. He stood out so much in this era.
I swear to you, like, I have seen some of Brian Pillman from this era, but not a lot. Mostly just like the Liger match and like a couple other things here and there.
That's an amazing match.
Yeah, but oh my God, he looks like such a star here.
He really does.
Like, he's built in a way that doesn't even make sense. He is like 100 pounds of muscle packed into 50 pounds worth of space. It's ridiculous.
He played nose tackle in the NFL.
Which is incredible because he's tiny.
Like 5'10", 5'9". Yeah. Unbelievable.
And like the athleticism that he has in this match is way ahead of its time, to the extent where like the announcers don't even really know how to call it. Like, it's just one of those things where like he's doing moves that nobody's ever seen before, and they're just like, yeah, he's jumping around.
Yeah. Bill Irwin is a guy who entertains me too, because he's just like your prototypical Southern wrestler. He's wrestling in blue jeans. He has like the old school wrestler's build where he's not like buff or jacked. He's just got like a really big belly and a thick upper body, but he's just like nasty, grind you down, beat you up, heel wrestler. And this was a good combination.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he did a great job, too. Like, he's yelling so loud, and he just basically yells the same thing over and over, like, why aren't you flying now? So he did this great thing where he dumps him outside the ring and just like, you want to fly? Fly!
I love ring trash talk. I'm glad Kevin Owens has brought that back.
Oh, yeah. It was so good. And then the finish to this is amazing.
Yeah. So Pillman goes up onto the top rope of like the other ring, the adjacent ring, and comes off. It jumps like 50 feet in the air on this crossbody.
Oh my God, it's so amazing. And they hit it perfectly. And like, even when like he was going to climb up out there and Jim Ross was like, what? I don't know what he's doing. Like, wait, you're in the wrong ring, Brian.
Yeah, this is where the two rings gets really cool, when you find a creative way to use it like that.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Great way to end the match. I mean, it's not really much of a match in general, but man, Brian Pillman looks amazing.
Yeah, it was a very generic match in terms of how it was set up, but yeah, I love Flying Brian Pillman, and it's just a terrible tragedy that he had that car accident that kind of destroyed his body and he died so young, because he's one of the big what-ifs in wrestling history.
Absolutely.
Next up, we had Gordon Solie interviewing Paulie Dangerously, a.k.a. Paul Heyman, a very young Paul Heyman here. He had to be in his, 20s.
Oh, absolutely. And he looks it, too. And I never really saw much of Paul in this era, and I never really realized the brilliance of having, a Yankee loudmouth bastard.
Oh, my God, yeah, the New York Jew in the South in the 1980s.
Oh, man, it's so brilliant, and they hate him so much. But, yeah, and this is a great promo, too. He really, gets into it. He brings up, the Starrcade where Jim Cornette fell off the scaffold and he fucked up his knee, which everybody knows about. I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah. He says he's going to just destroy Cornette's knee tonight. So it's a tuxedo match between him and Cornette tonight, which I can't even put into words how awesome that is.
And it's so funny because Cornette and Heyman spend time they hype this up like they're going to be in a cage match and it's going to be a
This was the real feud between the Midnight Express and the original Midnight. That was cool, but the real feud was Cornette versus Heyman. That was what people were getting into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jim Cornette finally being a babyface after years and years as a hated heel, and the fact that they had found a heel even more obnoxious than Cornette to go against him.
And I love the idea that what they did was they basically had Paul try to steal Jim Cornette's identity from him. Just I'm going to take your idea and your mannerisms and everything that you do, and I'm going to steal it.
I'm the new hotshot kid.
Yeah, and I'm going to do it better. I love that as an idea.
Yeah. Things I didn't love. The next match, the Skyscrapers against the Dynamic Dudes.
How can you not like the Dynamic Dudes?
Shane Douglas and Johnny Ace. They are totally radical, man, with their backwards baseball caps and their Frisbees and their skateboards.
Everything you've ever heard about how lame the Dynamic Dudes are, I need you to understand that they're a million times lamer than you've heard.
Oh, God.
Can we talk about the fat kid Frisbee toss?
Scott's idea. It's the Frisbee toss was over. The fans got into that.
But the kid didn't like it. They literally, they go to the guardrail and Johnny Ace is like, hey, come here, kid, come here. And some fat kid, totters up to the guardrail. Johnny Ace almost throws his back out, pulling him over the rail. And then he just kind of hey, let's toss this Frisbee. And he tosses it to him. And the kid just what the fuck do I do with this?
I was shocked the dudes actually got a positive reaction here. I've seen a later pay-per-view, and I can't think it may have been Halloween Havoc from this year, because I think that was in Philadelphia, where the crowd just completely shits on them, which is not something that happened in this era.
They're also not very good.
No, not at all. I think I've made my issues with Shane Douglas clear, and this is an even worse version of Shane Douglas than franchise Shane Douglas.
Absolutely. And I mean, Johnny Ace had his moments in All Japan by being the worst member of the roster on an amazingly stacked roster. But
Johnny Ace is one of those guys who, for some reason, could only wrestle in Japan. Never got over in America.
No. And I mean, here, he's just a real shitty babyface. And
this match is weird. So you have these two giant monster heels against these two, horrible white meat baby faces. This feels like it should be a squash, but instead it's 10 minutes long.
And it must be said, there's only one really over person in this match, and it's Sid. And they spend the whole match
for Sid.
They spend the whole match chanting, "We want Sid." And then when Sid eventually gets tagged in, he poses for 30 seconds, and the fans go nuts. What a burial!
Yeah. So if I told you that one of the members of the Skyscrapers almost killed one of the dynamic dudes with a botched power bomb at the end of this match, you would assume it was Sid. But it was Dan Spivey.
Dan Spivey. And that's a nasty...
Oh.
It's nasty, but it doesn't even look good. Like, it's one of those things where, like, you can't even, like, get it over further by saying you injured the guy, because it really just looks like he couldn't get him up for the power bomb.
He gets him, like, half up and then, like, I don't know, loses his grip because of baby oil or something. It just, like, drops him flat on his head.
Horrible.
Yeah. Pretty bad and way too long match.
Also, let me just ask you real quick. This is one of my first times ever seeing Dan Spivey in the ring. Does he look like Steve Austin just, like, ate, like, a Super Mario mushroom and just, like, grew a lot?
He kind of does here.
He has, like, the Steve Austin Hollywood blonde hair. And
I also remember him from the really shortly lived Waylon Mercy gimmick that had a lot of potential.
It's amazing that this is the same person. Because if you saw those two people, it doesn't even make sense.
So next up, we had Gordon Solie interviewing Jim Cornette. He says, doesn't matter if Heyman breaks both of his legs. He's taking Heyman out tonight. So next, we've got our Tuxedo match. Jim Cornette against Pauly dangerously. So the storyline here was they dangerously had been managing Randy Rhodes and Dennis Condrey, who were the original version of the Midnight Express. He'd been managing them in the AWA, and the NWA got the idea, hey, let's bring him in and have him fight. So there was just this progression of people in the Midnight Express. It started as Condrey and Rose. I think Rose left, and they replaced him with Bobby Eaton, and then they replaced Condrey with Stan Lane. I mean, Eaton and Lane are the best and most famous version, but the team had been around for a long time before that version of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like, really every incarnation of the team is unbelievable. The Condrey and Rose version was only okay. Like, they just didn't have the chemistry that all the other incarnations of it had. But, I mean, this is maybe the most over-heel tag team. I mean, I don't want to knee-jerk say ever, but maybe ever?
Yeah, I mean, they were awesome. And I wish... I don't know what would have happened if they had gone to the WWF, but I would have loved to see them wrestle like the Hart Foundation and the Rockers and the British Bulldogs in this era.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a very different style. I don't necessarily know, because they didn't stand out like visually, and they didn't do a lot of flashy stuff. They just were so amazing at drawing heat out of stuff. And then when you put them with the Rock and Roll Express, who were true masters of like getting sympathy, like that's how you got the magic. That's why those two teams wrestled a billion times.
Yeah. So this match has a ton of heat, but unfortunately then the bell rings and they have to actually wrestle each other. Cornette can work a little bit. Heyman, good God, Heyman is terrible.
And it's important to remember, this isn't big, fat walrus Heyman. Like, he's, like, not in terrible shape here. Even though the announcer spent the whole match going like, if either one of these guys lose their shirts, the women and children may have to leave. Like, everything, like, it's not like they couldn't do anything athletically, but, I mean, it's just weird. It's amazing how long this match goes when they only have, like, 5 things to do.
This should have been, like, 2 or 3 minutes, and instead it's 6 to 7, and it feels like eternity, because, like, a lot of it is just Heyman throwing punches, and he cannot throw a punch.
No.
Also, he forgets which knee is Cornette's bad knee. You can, at points, see Cornette telling him, no, the other one.
Oh, my God. And, I mean, Cornette's been in, like, vague kind of matches like this before. And he's Cornette knows what he's doing.
Physical stuff. Like, he's interfered in matches, and he's had to kind of get in the right place at the right time. Like, he can get through this. Heyman had probably nenever been in the ring or done anything physical to this point.
That said, this is still pretty entertaining, and the fans are
the crowd is crazy for this. Yeah, Heyman using his cell phone as a weapon, Cornette making his comeback, beating the crap out of Heyman, throwing the powder in Heyman's face, and then the Tuxedo match. The concept entertains me.
I found it so funny too, because I don't remember what match that Jim Ross was making all the like calling somebody super gay in. Like, what match was it where he was just like, oh, he was training in San Francisco with Bruce and Earl?
Probably this one, looking at the rest of the card. I don't know what else it would be.
Yeah, he might have. But then they spend the whole rest of this match being like, strip him down, get him naked, come on.
Yeah. Anyway, Cornette wins by ripping off Heyman's pants, and Heyman, in shame, runs to the back. Great face reaction to Cornette here. Yeah, this was silly, but I loved it.
Oh, yeah, this was perfect. I had nothing against this whatsoever. This is exactly when you have a supercard like this, you need like little fun nothing matches just to like make the crowd happy, and that's exactly what this was.
Yeah. So next up, we had the Varsity Club against the Steiner brothers. The Varsity Club being Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda here. Gimmick basically that they're former amateur wrestlers who wear varsity jackets. Rick Steiner had been part of it, but they were just, kind of using him to nefarious ends. And his brother Scott had come in and set him back on the right path. This was the first pay-per-view match for the Steiners as a team. Scott's brand new to the business at this point. Rick had been around for a while. Scott Steiner is weirdly wearing trunks instead of a singlet here. Maybe not getting what their gimmick is, that they're former amateur wrestlers. I really like the Varsity Club as just like a campy 80s heel gimmick.
It's just so weird to see Kevin Sullivan in it, because I always think of him as like the voodoo
demon,
crazy guy.
And he had been playing that character before this. So, yeah, it's really weird that he's now just like, four-sport high school athlete, Kevin Sullivan. Yeah. So this was a good match. This was short. It was only like 4 minutes, but it's like Tornado Rules street fight, and they're just brawling all over.
Yeah, it's actually a testament to like how good these guys all are. I had no idea this was like Scott's first match in the company or anything like that. I mean, it was just kind of like a Steiners match. It wasn't like an amazing one, but Steiners matches feel like Steiners matches, and it was like that way just from the beginning.
Yeah, somehow this is like half the length of the Skyscrapers and the Dudes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just good match, a lot of brawling. The Steiners have Missy Hyatt in their corner for some reason.
Thank God you said that. I had no idea who the hell the woman with the giant breasts randomly was who was walking next to the dog on the way to the ring.
Yeah, I don't know why wrestling promoters think that baby faces should have hot women as their valets, but they should not. It doesn't work that way. And Missy Hyatt is a heel.
Like, the basic psychology behind it is just, like, if you put a hot girl with a baby face, it makes guys in the crowd dislike the baby face more. Why would you think it would make them like them more?
Yeah, I don't know. It's an odd fit here.
It's weird.
So the finish comes when Sullivan scoops up Rick. Scott comes off the top with a cross body onto both of them for the pin. Really fun, quick match.
Yeah, I mean, that's what to say about it. It was just a lot of fun. It was a Steiners match, honestly.
Yeah. And now business starts to pick up because we've got Sting against Muta for the TV title.
Oh, baby.
Yeah. So Sting is defending the TV title against the undefeated Great Muta. Muta's got his manager Gary Hurd in his corner. Sting has Eddie Gilbert for some reason. Didn't really explain what the deal with that was. Muta was such a star here, and they totally dropped the ball on him.
It is. I always wondered if the agreement with New Japan that allowed him to come here made it clear that he would not be able to stay. So, like, they knew. I don't know if this was an excursion for him or if he actually just worked for them. I think it was just an excursion, which would explain why they didn't go further with him.
It lasted about 6 months. He wraps up at Starrcade and is gone for a while and kind of intermittently reappears in WCW throughout the years.
It's just such a shame because if they had just had him, man, like I would have to imagine they would have gone further with him, but he's the most over heel on this show other than Funk, and that's just because Funk's working Flair.
But he also does stuff that's so awesome he gets cheered.
He's
busting out the handspring elbow and the moonsault. Like, this is stuff people have not seen before.
It's so funny because he and Sting only have like 3 or 4 matches, But I think even today, like when I think back on who is Sting's like greatest nemesis, it's Muta.
Yeah, it's like a comic book. It's his kind of dark mirror.
But it also brought something out of Sting. Like Sting was having like your normal, like this is the next big star babyface kind of matches, and he had like a fun moveset. But the matches with Muta brought something out of Sting that he would be trading on for like 10 years after that.
He works really hard here to keep up with Muta. So they start out in opposite rings so that Sting can do the spot where he jumps over the ropes with a crossbody. It's amazing to see a guy who's like 250 pounds do that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Muta comes off the top rope with a chop and then a handspring elbow, a moonsault where Sting moves and Muta lands on his feet, which doesn't seem like a good idea to me.
No, not really at all.
On that one, plancha to the floor. A lot of the crowd is cheering Muta at this point because what he's doing is so awesome. They can't not get behind him.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff on this show, you kind of have to dial back your expectations and be like, all right, this is 1989. Obviously, it's a whole different era of wrestling, whole different era of high spots. It's a very different world. When you watch this match, you don't have to do that. Muta's amazing even for now. Like, if anybody was doing these moves now as crisply as he's doing them, you'd still be like, holy shit, awesome.
This is just, the pace of this match blows me away. It's barely 10 minutes, but they pack so much in. Muta misses a handspring elbow. Sting fires up. A huge press slam. Sting does a plancha to the floor, but Muta moves, but Sting lands on his feet. Again, wouldn't recommend that. This foreshadows Sting's knee problems in 1990, I feel. Muta goes for the mist, but he hits the referee. Sting goes for the Stinger splash, but misses. Muta hits a crazy moonsault like 3/4 of the way across the ring. A second referee comes in for a really close 2 count, and then Sting back suplexes Muta. He gets the pin, but both their shoulders are down, so Muta absconds with the title belt.
Oh my God, the crowd was so mad, and it was glorious. The crowd,
back when you could actually get heat by doing that.
Yeah, like if you're wondering why that's one of those cliche spots they still do to this day, it's because back then, like stealing a belt from a babyface was like you were gonna get beat the fuck up.
Stolen valor.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, and it's such a great way to get heat back on Muta because by the end of this match, the crowd loves both of these guys so much.
Yeah. So this ended up being the title was held up for months, and they would do matches at house shows that would always end in like disqualifications and countouts. Eventually, Muta won and became the undisputed TV champion. His run, he again lasts about another 6 months in WCW and does some notable stuff, but then just kind of goes back to Japan and never really repeats this run.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, he would go on to be probably one of like the 5 biggest Japanese wrestlers of all time. So it's sort of a weird thing. Is he the only guy to get over on a main event level, like coming over from Japan and working in the States like this?
Yeah, as far as I can think of. I mean, we'll see what happens with Nakamura. Nakamura is probably the best chance since then.
Right. But I mean, Nakamura was already established in Japan. I mean, this is a guy who's...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think this is it. I think he's the only guy who really went back to Japan and became that much bigger of a star for it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that they used him like this and that he got over so hard, and it really kind of forecasts just how incredibly over he's going to get. Honestly, like you mentioned that Sting messes up his knees. Muta does so much damage to his knees during this period. By the time like 2000 rolls around, his knees are... I'm not sure he has knees. I'm pretty sure that there's just like little elves in there holding it up.
Yeah, more machine than man. So the lesson, don't do moonsaults off the top rope and land on your feet.
Or maybe do, because this match was fucking amazing.
Yeah, if this was the only time he did that spot, then it's okay.
But it wasn't.
Yeah. So the next match is for the U.S. title. Lex Luger defending against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. So Luger had a hot babyface run in '88 after he got kicked out of the Horsemen and started challenging Flair. Came up short against Flair for the title, and then I guess they just didn't really know what to do with him, and they turned him heel. Won the U.S. title from Barry Windham at Chi-Town Rumble, and here he's kind of surprisingly a heel getting cheered, which I don't think there was a ton of in this era, and also you wouldn't think of Lex Luger as the guy who would be getting cheered as a heel, because it always seemed like he didn't click as a babyface and he was more of a natural heel.
I'll always wonder how much Lex Luger and Sting kind of interfered with each other's pushes, because I felt like there was a period there where they couldn't decide who the next big guy was. And then whenever they were pushing one of them, they just didn't have anything for the other one to do. Like, it's one of those weird things where, like, you feel like you have two next big thing hot babyface stars, and you're so nervous about which one it is that you wind up making none of them. Like, I think it might be something like that.
It definitely feels like they turned Luger here heel just to kind of clear the decks for Sting to continue his rise.
Right, and then they won't turn Sting heel, but they'll kind of like throw him to the side a little bit later when they try to have Luger beat Sting or beat Flair, right?
Yeah.
Or was he a heel when he did that? I can't remember.
He was a face when he was going to beat Flair, but Flair left the company and they turned Luger heel as he won the title.
Got it.
I mean, the whole thing got screwed up because Flair couldn't agree to a new contract, but the announcers do acknowledge Luger getting cheered, which I liked, that this is the era where the announcers have to, maintain their credibility by, they have to call what's going on, or they, will be viewed as dishonest frauds by the audience. So I liked that they didn't pretend like the crowd wasn't behind Luger.
Yeah, and that was very cool because, like, the crowd, it's not something that you could just sweep under the rug. Like, it's not one of those things where, like, oh, there's a mixed reaction in the arena right now. Like, no, the fans loved Luger.
Yeah, and they're not booing Steamboat either. It's just they like both guys.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they weren't because Steamboat was so cool during this era. Man, he's got the kimono dragon, and he's the family man. Like, it works. It only ever worked for him.
Yeah, the kimono dragon is a really cool touch.
Cool.
I'm a big Ricky Steamboat fan. Sadly, never got kind of his proper run in the WWF because he had that falling out with Vince right after he won the IC title. He inexplicably goes back to the WWF like the year after this and gets completely buried when they make him the Dragon and refuse to acknowledge that he's actually Ricky Steamboat.
He's the Dragon!
Yeah, no relation to the previous Intercontinental and World Heavyweight Champion Ricky Steamboat. Really, really good match here. Like, one of Lex Luger's best matches ever.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not hard to do when you're up against Steamboat because Steamboat is so unbelievably, like, next level amazing at what he does. Like, Ricky Steamboat could never have been a capable heel. Like, not just because he's a babyface kind of guy. Like, I just don't think he could have worked that style. But he's honed this, like, underdog technical perfection babyface, like, unbelievably. Like, there's no like movement that he hasn't pre-planned. There's nothing that doesn't fit. It's amazing.
Yeah, his matches stand out so much in this era. So it's just a battle of Luger's power against Steamboat's speed. Steamboat dominates early. Luger cuts him off as he's coming back into the ring. I should mention this was supposed to be a no disqualification match, but Luger refused to wrestle with that stipulation in place, so they waived it. I mean, I guess good on Lex Luger to take the hardline negotiating tactic. He's right that he shouldn't have to defend his title in such a brutal match as a no disqualification match.
I always love the very, very, very occasional times when wrestlers will actually be kind of vaguely smart about that. Like, wait a minute, I don't have to do that shit. I'm not wrestling in a no DQ match. That's stupid. I'm not doing that. And then the promoters are like, oh yeah. It's also important to note, like, this wasn't really the era of authority figures, like, everywhere. So it wasn't just like a storyline that Lex Luger wouldn't do this, or like he didn't have to like beat up the GM of. Like, it was literally just like wrestlers and managers had way more agency. Yeah,
I don't even know who. I think Jim Hurd may have been the on-screen authority figure who appeared like once a year in this era. I don't even know who was running things.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where like it doesn't even matter who the authority figure is because on screen it's not a big deal. Like, the fans don't care. It's not part of it.
Yeah. Luger kind of throws Steamboat around, but he could never keep him down. Steamboat makes a comeback. It ends when he tries to body slam Luger from the apron into the ring, but can't hold him. Luger actually goes to the top rope, but gets thrown off, which is a big bump for a guy his size to take. Backdrop on Steamboat into the second ring and almost dropped him like on his head into the gap between the two rings. Would have decapitated him.
And that was one of the things that really bothered me about the two-ring setup is like it's literally just two rings shoved up against each other. Like they couldn't have come up with a way where you have people constantly going in between the two rings to like have something in the middle or like some sort of padding or like something. Like it's literally just like there's a gap right there.
It seems really dangerous, but I don't think anybody ever got hurt by it, if I'm remembering correctly. But I can remember some close calls.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where, like, why didn't you figure out a way to just, like, not have I don't know. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, all my ideas for not doing it are stupid. Like, you can't just, like, not have ropes on that side.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's just there's a lot of dangerous stuff. Or, like, in the Battle Royal, people are getting thrown out into the other ring. Well, a couple of guys just get thrown into the middle, and it's like, ugh, that looks so painful.
Yeah. I mean, especially knowing that the apron is where kind of the base of the ring is, and that's the hardest part of it.
You're hitting two different ones at the same time. It sucks.
Yeah. Luger brings a chair into the ring. He gets catapulted into the corner and hits his head on the chair. Then Steamboat grabs the chair and hits Luger with it for the DQ. I didn't know if that felt earned to me, that like Steamboat would be so out of control he would kind of willingly get himself disqualified, but then Steamboat proceeded to beat Luger up with the chair after the match.
Yeah, I didn't think this storyline was that heated coming into this, like especially for a guy like Steamboat, who never really lets the heel get under his skin. That's sort of the whole idea of his character, right?
Yeah, it was a really good match. Finish was nothing special, but I really enjoyed it. Like I said, probably one of Luger's best matches. Although, again, he's working against Ricky Steamboat. I love when people will defend somebody as a wrestler because it's like, oh, he had good matches with Flair, good matches with Bret Hart. Everybody can have good matches with those guys.
Yeah, you tell me what kind of matches they had with Dan Spivey, and then I'll feel a lot better.
Yeah. So up next, we've got the War Games match, which I felt like was just kind of an afterthought on this show, but it's the Fabulous Freebirds and the Samoan SWAT team, aka the Head Shrinkers, against the Midnight Express, the Road Warriors, and Dr. Death, Steve Williams. Kind of just a hodgepodge of teams here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't really figure out, like, I actually did some, like, poking around online because I wanted to figure out if there was some rhyme or reason to these teams. Because I've only ever seen the really, really good War Games matches that people, like, recommended to me, almost sort of out of context. And it's very clear, like, all right, that's, like, a team that's been built over a couple of, like, at least a couple of weeks, but usually a couple of months where these teams come together and they're going to fight the heels and it's getting business. Here it was just like, I don't know, who's a heel? Toss them in. Let's go.
Yeah. It's like the Midnight Express had been feuding with the Samoans and the Freebirds at different points. The Road Warriors had been feuding with the Freebirds. And I think Steve Williams is just kind of there to balance things out, to make it 5-on-5, because the Freebirds are Hayes, Terry Gordy, and Jimmy Jam Garvin.
It really felt like it was just the Freebirds versus a bunch of people who hate the Freebirds. And, oh, yeah, there's some Samoan guys.
Yeah. So, like I said, Samoan SWAT team are the Head Shrinkers, Samu and Rikishi. Rikishi is a baby here.
It's amazing to think that Rikishi is on a 1989 major pay-per-view. Like, just let that sink in, because he won't get his first really good run until 2000.
Yeah. And when he showed up in 2000, I thought he was like a rookie, because he hadn't been around for several years at that point.
I thought that like 5 different times. I thought the Sultan was a rookie.
I'm just going to kind of skip over this match because I thought it was just a really generic War Games match. Like, not terrible, but just kind of dull. Naturally, the heels win the toss, and they have the advantage the whole time. The only really notable thing was when Steve Williams came in and bench pressed Terry Gordy into the top of the cage like 10 times, which is one of the more amazing feats of strength I've ever seen.
Yeah. Why didn't Dr. Death do more in America? I mean, in Japan,
I've always wondered that.
In Japan, he's a gigantic name because he was there during the Four Pillars of Heaven era in the early 90s. Like, not even the Four Pillars. That was sort of during the transition. But, like, it was like him and Johnny Ace or, like, him and Stan Hansen. Like, it was amazing. But, like, I always wondered because he's got a great look. He's got a great style. Can he not talk? Did he have heat?
It was just that, like, he was making so much money in Japan, he never stayed in America for long enough to get over because, like, clearly he would have gotten a monster push with Bill Watts in charge. But I think the money in Japan was so good, he couldn't commit to being full-time with WCW. And, like, by the time he went to the WWF in 98, he still probably could have had a run, but then he got in the Brawl for All and got hurt and got knocked out by Bart Gunn, and they did the stupid heel JR gimmick with him, and he was pretty much done at that point.
Oh, the Brawl for All. Have we done the Brawl for All yet? We haven't, right?
Nope, we should.
Oh, yeah, list that one on a future podcast. Holy shit.
So the faces win after Hawk hits Garvin with a neck breaker and then locks him in a gory special. The faces go to leave. Animal gets beat up by the heels, locked in the cages. Eventually, the faces get in through the door, and the heels run out through the other door. Not one of the better War Games matches. No blood and kind of lacking the intensity these things had when they were at their best.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as somebody who's seen a million Lethal Lockdown crap fests, this felt a lot more like that than like those legendary War Games matches everyone talks about.
Yeah. So coming up to the main event, Gordon Solie interviews Ric Flair. A very good interview here where Flair is much more subdued than usual, and Solie asks some smart questions about whether his neck is 100%, about whether he'll have ring rust because he hasn't wrestled since May. Just kind of a refreshingly different interview.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love Solie as an interviewer, though it looks like he's so subdued for most of the show that, like, when people are, like, ranting and raving, losing their shit, it's kind of funny to see this, like, nice old man just standing there patiently waiting for them to finish. But here it's amazing. Like, Flair has, like, great respect for Solie, and they're doing this back and forth. Like, this is great. This is a whole new kind of Flair. Like, I've never really seen him do a promo like this.
Yeah, and I think it put over how big this match was, that, like, for once, Flair is not ranting and raving.
Which is good, because Funk, when he comes out, does plenty of ranting and raving for both of them.
Oh, yeah. Funk is out first for the match. He's got Gary Hart and, like, 10 cops backing him. And a couple of the fans do seem to be trying to get after him.
Terry Funk is like a chaos demon from hell when he comes out to the ring. This was the beautiful thing, and this is why Terry Funk made so much money, like, everywhere that he went. It's just like, you believed that Terry Funk was crazy. Like, he comes out here, and he looks like he needs those cops to keep him from you. Like, that's the genius of Terry Funk.
Yeah. And what I really appreciate about this match is these two guys are two of the best technical scientific wrestlers of all time. They could have an amazing technical wrestling match, but it wouldn't make sense here. So instead, they just beat the fuck out of each other.
Yeah, it's great. Now, let me ask, where's the empty arena match around this? Is that after this?
They didn't have an empty arena match that I remember. They have a great I Quit match at
that's the one I'm
Champions in November.
Yeah, that's the one that I was thinking of. Yeah, because I've seen that match before, and it's like super, super intense. And I didn't realize that they had this match before it. And this match is great. Like, I honestly think that this is a better match than the I Quit match that everybody talks about.
That's a hot take.
I know, because that's one of those legendary matches that everyone thinks is like one of the best of all time. It's amazing, don't get me wrong, but I just like this one more. I love the way that Funk went for the pile driver again and again and again and again, and like it's so focused around that one move. And Flair is like ingenious in the way he gets out of it. Like, I just loved how focused this match was on that one idea.
Yeah, and there are multiple pile drivers here, but it never gets kicked out of, because every time they hit one, it's like he hit him, but he's in the ropes. He hit him, but he rolled to the floor. He hit him, but he couldn't make the cover.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just so good. I will say that I did not like the finish. Like that's the one thing that the I Quit match has definitely over this one is I don't know, man. It just doesn't work for me when you do that in the main event of a show when in a heated match like this.
So the finish was Flair went to, well, I guess Funk did the spinning toe hold on Flair. Flair reversed it into a spinning toe hold of his own. Funk rolled it into a cradle, and Flair kind of sloppily rolled through into his own cradle to get the pin. I think it was like not great execution of. I don't think the idea is terrible because I think you need to finish this in a way where they can, where the feud is not over yet. So Flair winning with a cradle is probably going to be the way to go. But yeah, I didn't think it was very strong execution.
Yeah, and especially on top of how great basically everything in the entire match is done, except for didn't Flair just like drop Funk on his neck outside the ring or something horrible like that?
He went to suplex him from the apron out to the floor and kind of slipped as he got him up, and they both tumbled out. Yeah, that looked bad.
Yeah, it looked pretty bad. But yeah, almost everything else in this match is like technical perfection, even while they're brawling. Like it's just like it's almost hard to describe because you can't think of like technical brilliance, but like their strikes are so great and their intensity is so high and they're working the crowd in this like brilliant sequence of ways. Like everything about it is perfect. They bring the branding iron in like just the right time. Like these guys are just next level great at what they do.
I love that they both bladed, even though that was clear. Maybe it was allowed on pay-per-view, but we had not seen blood in even the War Games match to this point. But yeah, both of them just blatantly juice here.
It's kind of funny because that's sort of Flair's history. Like when Flair's gonna blade, Flair's gonna blade. You're not gonna stop him.
What are they gonna do?
I say even Vince tried to stop him. Fuck it. Flair will blade when Flair blades.
He'll pay that fine.
Yes, he will.
Yeah, absolutely awesome match. Favorite of mine from this period. So Flair is celebrating. Muta shows up, and Muta mists him. And Funk beat Flair up, and Sting makes the save. Huge pop for that. And then they proceed to brawl for like 10 minutes, and like it keeps stopping and starting up again and stopping and starting up again, which like it kind of made me laugh at a certain point, but I also thought that I liked the way it felt organic because it was not like a scripted, oh, now they're done.
Yeah. And I love seeing Ric Flair and Sting like kind of on the same side because they're always going to be linked in history, right? They're just two of those people that the fans are just like, yes, Sting and Flair on the same side or Sting and Flair feuding. What a weird team, even while they're just brawling here, that Funk and Muta are.
Yeah.
Like you kind of feel like there's no reason why they would ever like even talk to each other except that Gary Hart manages both of them.
Yeah, the whole Gary Hart, J-Tex Corporation Japanese guy thing was not, I don't know what the backstory on that was.
Yeah, I think it stretches into like other companies. I think it's just an idea that came from World Class and they just brought it up and never explained it.
Did he manage Great Kabuki?
I think he did, yeah. I think he wrestled all those kind of guys, or managed them.
Yeah, and I think after this they also brought in Hiro Matsuda because they felt like they needed a Japanese guy in there too.
Yeah, that would continue on well into the 90s. They did it with, oh Christ, who did they have in the main event? I'm totally blanking. Crap. It was like Starrcade, like 94 or something like that.
When they brought in Fujinami to wrestle Ric Flair?
That's one of the things, but I think they also had, it wasn't Chono. I'm going to say Chono, but it wasn't him. Someone will yell at me on Twitter about this later.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they did the World Cup of Wrestling at Starrcade 95, but I think that was Sonny Ono who was back in that.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
So at the end of this, we get kind of a quick interview where Flair is now bloody and screaming like a madman.
Legendary interview. Like it really is just so good. And it's such a great way to like contrast it with the subdued, very intense, but very focused and very polite Ric Flair from earlier. Now he's a madman.
Yeah. Everything about this was great.
I was just so happy. Did we ever get a Flair Muta match?
They have like a 2-minute match at Starrcade this year.
That's such a shame because honestly,
Yes.
like, what could they have done?
This is the year they did the round robin tournament. So it was like Flair, Sting, Muta, and probably Luger was the fourth guy, if I'm remembering. And so they had both a singles and tag round robin tournament. So there's way too many matches on the show. So Flair and Muta get like 2 minutes.
That's a shame because that you could have sold a Starrcade on Flair and Muta the way they look here.
Definitely. So this was used to set up the main event for Halloween Havoc, which was Funk and Muta against Flair and Sting in a cage match. I thought this was a really good tease for that. Even if you missed all the subsequent TV, you were probably sold on that match just based on this angle.
Oh, yeah, and it's so good. Like, these brawls to end the show are so goddamn hit or miss, especially these days. Like, you just got to have the right degree of intensity and the right degree of spontaneousness, and it's got to feel chaotic and real.
Yeah. What I loved here was that the cameras like weren't necessarily getting good shots because like they were fighting into the crowd and in places where there were no cameras.
Exactly. It's not just that cliche thing where like a million security guards run out and then they're just running through the security guards to get one more shot in. It feels like these guys want to brawl all the way back to the hotel. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So I think this is rightfully remembered as, kind of an all-time great pay-per-view. Like the first half of it's nothing special, but is kind of like a fun capstone of the time period it was in. And then the second half of it was just pretty awesome.
Yeah. I am so glad that you had us watch this show because I've never really been into this era of wrestling, even WWE's era of wrestling. The 80s just aren't for me. I like a little more, production value in my stuff and stuff like that. But my goodness, is this a must-see show? Anybody out there, please, 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 please watch this show. It is fucking fantastic.
Yeah. So, for various reasons, they never really capitalized on any of this. They didn't really go anywhere with Muta. They waited forever to put the belt on Sting. They ended up firing Flair. They ended up Steamboat ended up stupidly trusting Vince McMahon and going back to the WWF. And by the time he returned to WCW, there wasn't really a main event spot for him anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the story of this era of WCW, that they hit on something and it would be great and they would never be able to follow up on it.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is absolutely the case. And like I said, it's such a goddamn shame because they have so many people who clearly are going to be big stars if they just don't fuck it up. And then they fuck it up. Yeah, very unfortunate. Coming out watching this show, you would think WCW's primed for a huge run, but instead they spend, the next 6-7 years kind of in the wilderness. Yep, and then poor Sting's there the whole time trying to carry the shit on his back.
He really does. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for Great American Bash 1989. Next week, we're jumping forward into what I would consider kind of the birth of the modern era of wrestling with Money in the Bank 2011.
I am so goddamn excited to talk about this show. I haven't really talked about it at all since I did my initial review of it, which is at the time. But this is, of the modern era, this might be one of the most legendary shows. Like, it's one of those shows that you're going to talk about 20 years from now as being like, dude, do you remember Money in the Bank 2011? Holy crap. Like, I would say that I have gone back and watched the main event of this show at least 50 times, probably, just to hear the reactions and stuff like that. But up and down, like, it's such a great time capsule of that point in time.
Yeah, no, the Money in the Bank shows are always fun because of the random people who show up in the Money in the Bank matches.
R-Truth.
Remember that Tensai was in one of them?
Oh my god, I forgot!
Like all of the core guys. Heath Slater was in one, Justin Gabriel was in one, Tyson Kidd.
Oh, and this is going to be such a great time to talk about the whole Sin Cara thing. Oh, I can't wait.
Oh, yeah. So that's what you've got to look forward to next week. CM Punk versus John Cena, and our explanations of why Sin Cara should have been awesome.
He should have been. God damn it!
It should have worked.
Ugh.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.